My name is Thomas Ledwell. I am a consultant. I run my own small boutique consulting firm and have for the last couple of years. In the past, I worked as a journalist for CBC and the BBC overseas. I also worked for the Montreal Gazette here in Montreal, first as a journalist, then doing digital strategy and so on. And for the last 10 years, I've been working in particularly strategic communications, program development, and with an eye towards social innovation and doing things differently within mostly the nonprofit sector. A number of the organizations I work with are, I would say, members of the English-speaking community and active within it, which is one of the doors that has brought me to this work. I also have the pleasure of working on a research project which involves a number of articles, working with co-authors both in Quebec and in the Maritimes, that is looking at minority linguistic communities from a variety of angles. We're looking at the representations within the media, in the current policy landscape, and how that's being presented, how the frictions and some of the ongoing discussions, occasional conflicts are being represented, how they're being felt by people on the ground. My own engagement with Bill 96 started several years ago, where I was invited to be one of the commissioners for the Quebec Community Groups Network public hearings, as they were essentially, they had been given a platform as one of only 3 Quebec English-speaking groups to speak to the National Assembly, the committee that was working on Bill 96 for those public hearings. Bill 96, in a sentence, it is reflective of what the government would say as well, is it is the update to Quebec's language law. And so Bill 101 would be the language law that everyone has in mind when talking about language laws in Quebec or anywhere in Canada, frankly. And passed in 1977, it has a long history. In many ways, it was a very successful bill in achieving what it wanted to achieve, which was the protection of the French language. And Bill 96 was introduced to enhance those protections. And so fundamentally, it is a continuation of the protection of the French language, something that I think the Francophone community feels very strongly about. And I would also add, I think many members of the English-speaking community also strongly support such a goal. One way in which Bill 96 is going to influence who has access to English education, it is this use of the term historic Anglos. And really, the government has this is a relatively new term, even if the definition has been well known for quite some time. Because what it means to be a quote-unquote historic Anglophone is to basically have someone who has the right to access English education. And looking at it from a more transactional perspective, some in the English-speaking community say that Bill 96 is turning the right to study in English into a passport to have access to English services, not only in education, but also in say, the courts, also in health. The spirit of the law is to try, in order to protect the French language, it means that more and more people have to study in French. And so while those with the historic right to study in English protect that right and will continue to have that right, for Francophones who want to study in English, for example, at CEGEP, Bill 96 now applies to CEGEPs in a way that Bill 101 did not, those rights are more limited. And also for Anglophones in CEGEP, there are new requirements to study more in French. There are implications that CEGEPs are concerned about there. And then there's the whole group known as the allophone community, which is to say those that are not necessarily English-speaking or French-speaking originally, which is an amorphous group of many different kinds of people and backgrounds and so on, that those without the historic protections are expected and required to study in the French language. The process to essentially get the card that allows you to have a member of your family study in English. Requirements are essentially someone who has studied in English in Canada for 50% of their elementary school. Those are the rules. I will surely forget that over time, but that's those are the metrics that were determined many years ago for what identifies someone as quote unquote Anglophone and having the right to study in English, which is, it's a marker. But one of the complicating factors in this is that you'll have, say, those who come from the English-speaking families but perhaps their kids have gone to French school because in Quebec and particularly in Montreal in this day and age, people want their kids to be bilingual, and bilingualism rates have been increasing, certainly in Quebec, perhaps not across the country, over time, by and large. Some of the main concerns, I think, with education do focus on CEGEP for now, and particular concerns that it may also apply to universities later on. Most importantly, English language CEGEPs do have a cap on the total number of students. The question is, if there's a shortfall because a number of fewer applications, people decide to go to, a group of people choose to go to a different CEGEP instead of your CEGEP all in the same year, can those shortfalls be carried to the following year because the funding is tied to headcount? And so if you have a 100-person shortfall one year, do you get the full funding, or do you only get the number, the funding attached to that number of people? And what happens over time if that becomes a trend? Does that mean that there will be not only no growth within English language CEGEPs, but also diminishing growth as things change over time? Personally, when I speak of Bill 101, I think that there's this interesting and perhaps unintended consequence, which is that it's created this generation of super confident francophones who've been educated in their own language, are comfortable being French, are having all kinds of opportunities. I mean, this is an excellent outcome. And now they want to learn English, and they want to go off and conquer the world as Quebecers, as French-speaking Quebecers who also speak English, whether that be here or in the rest of Canada or in the United States and beyond. I think that is happening organically in many cases. But I think that's one of the big question marks around the medium and longer term effects of Bill 96. In discussions over policy at the national level over the last decade, the question of Indigenous languages has become a much larger part of the conversation. There are dozens and dozens of Indigenous languages in Canada. There are a handful that are spoken by larger numbers of people across the country. And the federal government did pass an act respecting Indigenous languages, which essentially, borrows the language directly from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and enshrines it in law. So that's a significant first step. Similarly, the protection of the French language may provide some challenges in gaining, at the provincial level, further encouragement and supports for Indigenous languages. There are discussions. There are also core challenges, from some of the Indigenous communities around parts of the bill. It is very complex, but at the linguistic level, there is a revival for Indigenous languages right now, and I think that any protectionistic law will be seen as an impediment to the revitalization of these languages, which do, in some cases, risk dying if they're not given new life and attention now. Looking at just the plans and what has come to pass over the course of an evolution of Bill 96 is that the province does not want the English CEGEPs to grow. And so English CEGEPs will remain essentially the same size, looking at a 5 and 10 year plan. And the hope is that French CEGEPs will grow. So investments in some cases in English language CEGEPs have been canceled, and investments are being made instead in French-speaking CEGEPs. On the one hand, this will create more space for Anglophones to go to English language CEGEPs because there were some challenges getting access based on grades. But it does also mean that fewer Francophones will have access to English language higher education, at least at the CEGEP level. And that may limit opportunities for those who want to come out of their education fluently bilingual. Interesting thing about laws like this, Bill 101 being another example, is that the objectives are so long-term that it's hard to even look, in tranches of 5 and 10 years. You almost have to wait 10, 15, 20 years in order to see, are you achieving the ultimate objective? But for something as large as education, those real impacts will likely take almost a generation to be able to look back on and count. The question in the meantime is is specifically for the education part of it. Are there parts of the bill that will be challenged in court, and will they be determined as unconstitutional? Are there elements that have gone a little bit too far and may have to be clawed back or maybe forced back by the courts? And I think that is the sort of thing that we may see play out in the next 5 years. The immediate pressures are that how to implement certain major changes like 3 courses at stage up, which sounds simple enough in practice, but that does mean literally rewriting every program and making sure that it has those 3 courses built in. Then there's the logistical challenge of hiring people to teach those courses if you don't have those teachers in place already. Change comes with a lot of extra work, no matter what the change is, but I think that it's easy to underestimate how large that shift is for the stage ups especially. And I think the changes will be felt to a lesser extent within, say, the primary school system, only because they've been working with a fairly complex regime for quite some time, but say regarding the right to speak or to study in English. But that is a well-oiled machine. The system is in place. It hasn't changed dramatically under Bill 96, and so that will hopefully continue along with as a complex but working system.